Hello and welcome to Crucible Radio, the podcast for all things Destiny 2 PvP, or in this case, PvE/PvP, the ultimate combination experience that is Gambit. I'm your host, Bones. I usually do the show with my buds, Birds and Swain, but this week we've got an hour-long interview with the design leads of Gambit from Bungie, Lars Bakken and Robbie Stevens. And Swain's internet was out. This is very sad. He wasn't able to be there, but he loves to talk Gambit, so we had to represent him and chat about his favorite game mode. But Lars and Robbie, we have a great conversation. They have a lot to say. It's very, very interesting and really, really exciting, honestly, for the future of Gambit. So we're really excited to bring you another interview with the Bungie team. But I mean, we cover everything. I mean, we started the creation, how it formed, the inspirations, what it looked like. Some of the early forms of Gambit sounded really funny and awesome, but also chaotic and obviously changed. But we talk about why the maps are the way they are, the size, and what we could see from future maps, the evolution of the meta. How they handle boss melting, what kind of mechanics we might see, how they reacted to things like Hello's shotgun just dominating and things like that. And the other hot button topic of linear fusions, how that has played a part in forming Gambit and where they plan on going to react to that. It's all very interesting and a lot of exciting stuff for Season of the Drifter. But you know what? They're going to tell you. Don't listen to me about it. Listen to them. It's really, really cool. But we'll get right to it. The music this week is by Sean Currlin. Sean, thank you for the tunes. If you want to play your music on a show, you got some beats, you got some songs, you want to give us your tasty lyrics, send us an email at crucibleradio@gmail.com. And hey, if you like Crucible Radio, if you like us, you want to listen to a little bit more, how about an Everything But Destiny podcast? Because we do one twice a month over on patreon.com/Crucible Radio. It's $1 an episode, and really it helps us pay engineer Andrew and the rest of the CR team to keep this show going and do all the wonderful things they do to help us out. So, okay, without further ado, Lars Bakken and Robbie Stevens, let's talk some Gambit, shall we? Let's get to the bottom of this.
I promise you'll understand. It's all to lead you until you're missing peace. Now say joy, joy, please. What has become of us? It feels like it's all too much.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. I am so happy to introduce our guests here. This doesn't happen very often, and I'm always so pleased when it does. We've got joining us today in studio the boys from Bungie. We've got with us here Lars Bakken and Robbie Stevens. They were the design leads for Gambit. Gambit, as we know it today, exists because of their work, and we have got some questions. Welcome to the show, guys.
How's it going?
Hello, thank you for having us.
It's good. Thanks for being here.
That's great. So, let's dive right in. I'm kind of curious, how far back does the idea for Gambit go? When was that sort of first seed of combining PvE and PvP? When did that come about?
We've thought about trying to combine them for a very long time, but I think the original seed of what became Gambit really started early in, was it like 2017, Robbie? Like I was approached by Christopher Barrett, and if you know him, he's a longtime Bungie guy, and Scott Taylor, and they talked about wanting this is funny, it's going to sound funny now, but they wanted like an end game trials version of PvE. That's initially where sort of the conversation started coming from, which is like, hey, would you be interested in working on something like that or pitching something like that? And so that conversation started off in pretty early in 2017 when we were starting to work on what would become Forsaken. And so that's sort of where it started. And then within like a very short amount of time, Chris and I had worked a little bit on sort of you'll think of like a one sentence description of what the game could be. And we started talking about our initial pitch was Firefight meets Super Puzzle Fighter. That is the original pitch. And so I still have that written down somewhere, and we reference it a bunch, but that was really important to us because Firefight, as you as your listeners may or may not know, is something that I worked on in the Halo days.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was something I worked on in both ODST and Reach, and very close, near and dear to my heart. And then Super Puzzle Fighter is just, the idea was, if both groups or both teams or both individuals were doing their thing, like, you still need to be able to interfere with the other side. So like, if you think about the combination of those two things, you could probably see the references all over the place when you play Gambit right now.
I'm going to just go ahead and cross off the next question I had, which was to ask if Puzzle Fighter factored into it, because I played a lot of emulators during lunch in high school. No, that's so cool to hear. I'm curious, like, how did, once you sort of had that vision for it, I mean, did that sort of dictate basically Gambit as we know today? Or did it, was it sort of a winding path to get to sort of these same map, 2 sides, 4 players, and some crossover while you're shooting ads the whole time?
Definitely we tried to, if you think about Super Puzzle Fighter and you're already kind of poking at it, you have your 2 separate screens, right? Like, each player has a screen and you're combining blocks in them. And so I think one of the early design documents that we were writing actually was, that was one of the early decisions we made, is like, hey, if we're gonna make a PvE, again, this was starting as a PvE only activity, we're like, we need to fully separate the players. We don't want them mixing together. But we wanted equal opportunity. That's something that we had established as one of our early design pillars, was whatever opportunity one team has, the other team also needs to have that opportunity, because that will provide the best competition for the mode. If players can start to pick apart the mode and see imbalances or unfair advantages or disadvantages, we didn't think it would be as compelling of an experience. And so we kind of started that as the guiding light, right? It's like, the first prototype actually was just waves of enemies that you shot, and every enemy you killed gave you 1 point.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting too, Robbie sort of hinted at this, but the physical nature of the map, early on we said, hey, you need to understand that there's another team that you're fighting against, because, if you think back to Super Puzzle Fighter, it was one screen and you were on the left and your enemy was on the right, or vice versa, depending on whether you're player 1 or player 2. And how do you replicate that in a first-person game when you're trying to have, fight waves of enemies? That's pretty difficult, especially if you want it to be more than, we wanted it to be an experience that was like, 4 players per team. And so the original map, actually, the very first prototype, was just a duplicated map with a big glass wall in the center. And so we were like, oh, this will solve all the problems. Like, there's nothing wrong with this. And then 10 minutes into our first play test, we realized, hey, I'm so busy doing things on my side of the map that even though there's a big glass wall looking at the other team, I never look at the other team or even notice that there's a glass wall there, which is ridiculous. And so you see some of those original ideas, though, made their way into the ready room, which is that, the sequence that you have when you first spawn in, the drifters talking to you and everything. And so we kept some of those ideas, but basically the problem space of, I need to understand that there's another team, we tried to solve in other ways. And some of that is through the drifter talking to you. Some of that is through blockers and that entire system. And then obviously the final thing is invasion. Like, that was sort of that key came together, and Robbie and I still talk about that moment when he came in one morning. Robbie, I'll let you describe what happened.
So basically, like, the team had been talking for about a week or two about the concept of PvP. And one of our other pillars, I talked about one of our pillars being equal opportunity. One of our other pillars was like, players will not engage with each other in direct combat. And we were actually having a pretty hard time coming up with interesting things that teams could interfere with one another. Like, we had some zany ideas, like maybe one player could go over and like they would be rolling around in a giant like monkey ball, kind of like the game Monkey Ball, and rolling around and like destroying people, right? Like, can you be on a hang glider, like dropping bombs? And we kind of ended in this place where we're like, why are we trying to redesign effectively player versus player engagements in our game just to kind of hone on this pillar. And so then I kind of came into the morning. I came into the office one morning. I was like, Lars, I haven't been sleeping much, right? Like I haven't the last night. It's been clawing on my mind. It's something the team has been talking about. Like I really think players need to shoot at each other. And he kind of looked at me and he's like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Yes, yeah, I'm sure." And Lars did a really good job with the team of kind of giving us an attitude of wanting to try anything, right? Like he definitely established the team and from the outset of like, hey, we need to try whatever we can and whatever we think will be most fun. Try to not over-design it if we can. Come up with relatively simple designs and then play test them and figure out how to iterate on them. And so that's how we started. It was relatively easy for us in our engine to just kind of send one player over to the other arena and see how it felt. And instantly within that first play test in the first half hour, we kind of knew we had something that we had to pursue at that point.
How did that very first invasion go? Like, who was the first person to invade?
Oh my
and
gosh.
How many kills did they rack up?
What'd they use?
I can't remember. I feel like it might have been Robbie. I can't
remember either.
I do remember very distinctly that play test though, saying, yeah, this is totally going to work. Like we knew immediately because all we were doing was, we have teleporters in our game. And so we literally you jumped through a teleporter and it took you over to the other side. And there were a bunch of problems we had to solve, of course. Immediately, we saw them.
Well, yeah, one of the biggest ones. Like, so I think the person came over, they used a super and immediately wiped a couple players, and then killed a couple more, and then they started spawn camping, and immediately were like, yeah, this isn't very good. Just leaving this player lingering in this lingering here for a while. Because part of the thing we did when we first implemented too was we're like, well, this person's going to be at a 4v1 disadvantage, so we're gonna fill them up on their super. We're gonna give them a bunch of heavy ammo. We basically like overpowered them. like we're gonna give them an overshield, which a lot of these things I'm saying we have in the mode now, but they've been really tuned and dialed in. But it was basically like Superman came over to your arena and was just stomping around, which was hilarious.
Which was fun for that person. But then it began the long road of, okay, what are the rules around invasion? Okay, there needs to be a time limit. They need to have a goal. So if they hit their goal, they feel awesome, and then they're sent back to the other side, like, with the Drifter giving them a pat on the back and all that good stuff. Actually, I don't think the Drifter maybe even existed yet at that point.
Drifter was still being concepted.
Yeah, Drifter didn't exist yet. Yeah. But like being able to give that person really good feedback and knowing that they had like, we came up with 3 simple rules. It's like, can you last 30 seconds? Great, you'll be sent back. If you die, of course, you're going to be sent back. Or if you get a kill on the entire team, which it just ended up being 4 kills, we'll send you back. And so those were our core like principles around like, those are the things that happen when you invade, and anything else that goes is like completely like we just let you do anything that you can already do in PvP, but we also give you some new utilities, right? Like I know we still hear from people that some of our most, it'd be interesting to hear what you guys think, but our most hardcore PvP or Crucible fans will say, they are frustrated with like the wall hacks or something like that, which comes directly out of the fact that this person is in a 4v1. So like we do a lot of things to make their job more interesting, but I feel like the balance got to a really good place.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things we did play test, we landed at 30 seconds after a while, and that was after a bunch of iteration on that time. And the thing we found playtesting invasions was people were having a better time if we mitigated the amount of PvP that they felt moment to moment. And it's not to say that the PvP was bad; it was just that constantly getting invaded for the entire activity felt relentless, right? So then when we dropped down the time to more like 30 seconds, then we had this problem of like, well, now the invader has a really hard time hunting players. And we also were having discussions about the goals, like Lars was mentioning, and we realized this was about the same time that we were concepting the idea of the moats, and we called them trophies originally. Originally, when you killed combatants, we called them trophies that they drop, and you collect their trophies. And so we knew we had a resource game that we were building, and so what we realized was like, well, the invader's job should be to hunt the person with the most moats, with the most trophies. Yeah. And that really helped us guide us into like, okay, it's a 4v1. It seems reasonable that this person with such a limited amount of time should be given some type of advantage. And that's just the path we followed down.
Yeah, and it's more, invasion ended up being, and I think this is the right thing for us to do, ended up being a power fantasy that you can never have in any other activity, and that's okay. That's what's special about Gambit.
Yes.
The power fantasy is, hey, you're almost never going to get into a situation in Crucible where you go up against 4 players and you're just going to be, you have the overwhelming advantage. And very few times you can do that because the supers are pretty balanced in our game. There are times if you're really good that you're going to go on a 4-kill streak in your super, but you're in your super at that point. You're not in a normal state of being like you are, say, traditionally in the Crucible. And so like Invasion is about giving the player fantasy of just being, overwhelmed, but like being able to overcome those odds because you are in a unique position because of these traits that we've given you.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because the 1v4 is my favorite thing about Trials, that last Guardian.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if that PvP player mentality has a big effect on Gambit, even if it is a smaller thing. Like, how do you guys look at an elite Trials player going into Gambit, and do you have to factor that in, or do you want to keep it challenging for the Invader, or not? Or like you said, just have it be a little bit OP, a little bit more, you've got all of your abilities up instead of the average Crucible engagement. When
we were deciding like who we were trying to make this for, what we realized was we have a pretty what do we call it? An omnivore audience. That's kind of how we build our game is omnivore behavior. And so there was discussions at times like, should we let 2 people invade? Should the whole team be able to invade? Like there was definitely discussions around like, should it be 1v4 or should it not? And what we realized as we were developing it was that like we kind of wanted the roles to take a bigger form. Definitely as we were in that prototype phase and working on these concepts, we wanted people to be what we refer to as a collector, a person who's mainly focused on collecting motes, a person who's a killer who is probably one of your best person at PvE activities, and then your buddy who's probably one of the best PvP players that you play with. You might play quick play or comp with them off and on to do your weekly milestones, but that person is in those playlists all the time, right? And so we definitely, looking at a lot of our player data on what the players are doing in the games and kind of how they spend their times and activities, we definitely try to focus on teams trying to pull in those PvP players that might not necessarily play PvE content all the time. So we didn't design it specifically for them, but we definitely are trying to entice them, if that makes sense. So,
no, it does. Well, I want to ask it's sort of a boring technical question, but it's one that came up pretty early on when we were first thinking about this interview. I mean, one thing that we follow pretty religiously are patch notes, right? If we're going to see a change to balance, I mean, that has such huge ramifications for the game. And now we've got a situation where there's PvE and PvP sandbox balance happening in the same environment. Does that complicate things? I mean, was that a struggle to kind of get, that same shotgun to make sense, no matter, whether you're shooting an ad or a boss or another player?
Yes and no. I mean, you guys know this only too well, probably from talking to people on the sandbox team as well. Like the AI or like when you're fighting the Cabal, they don't really care very much if your shotgun's super powerful. Like they're not gonna stop playing the game or go back to orbit or do any of those things if the thing that's being used on them is OP. The interesting thing about Gambit was that we did have to try to pay attention to some of the more nuanced things that could be really good in either PvE or PvP. But because you're bringing in a specific loadout, like again, the AI aren't going to care if your stuff's overpowered. The other side might care when you invade, but there's sort of a specific set of things and like what players do and how they behave when they invade versus when they're playing the PvE portion. Like it's pretty different. I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but like it does make, I don't know that it makes our jobs more difficult. We think about it in a more nuanced way because we're trying to think about making sure the PvE side doesn't get slammed too hard. And I'm sure if you've played enough Gambit, you know that it's a pretty, the challenge is there, right? It's not like we wanted it to be persistently challenging like every time you go in. So I'm sure there are teams that are very good at wiping through the mobs and getting through the waves pretty quickly. but it's still dangerous. Like if you go into the center of an active front, you're gonna get beat down pretty quick if you're not careful, and that's intended, right? And same goes for invading, right? Like you have 4 people theoretically pointing their guns at you once they know where you're at. But I don't know. I guess it just adds more another couple of wrinkles, but I'm not sure that it changes things too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that Lars was hitting on there that's the most important is that we wanted to make sure that the mode had teeth, right? Like, and we've said it a couple times, we want to make sure that the invader has teeth and that the PvE combatants that have teeth, so that players are constantly making evaluations when they're in the mode and in each of those phases, and the Primeval is included in that, about how they're using their loadout, right? Ikelos is a great shotgun, and it's pretty good at clearing waves, but it's way better on the boss. And if you're running into the middle of the front with that Ikelos shotgun, that's probably not the best thing to do unless you have a lot of other teammates slaying around you, right? So there's definitely considerations to be made all the time, depending on who you're playing with and what their capabilities are. And so we wanted to make sure the mode had enough teeth so that those options are all valid, but for different reasons. Is another way that we were trying to think about it. We think that from the sandbox perspective, like Gambit is the place where, another thing we refer to it as is kind of like the Destiny buffet, right? It has a little bit of everything that you kind of see in other Destiny activities. And so we really wanted to try to make sure that there were different parts of the mode that could highlight different parts of the sandbox as well. And so that's why it's so nuanced.
Yeah, you've got your mob clears, you've got your boss burns, you've got your PvP portion, so it's got a little bit of everything.
You have the survivability with the moats, right? Yeah. It's definitely, that was intentional. It was definitely what we set out to do. And it's really piggybacking on top of all the amazing work that the Sandbox team does and trying to find out interesting ways to highlight it, really, more than anything else. So
there's definitely threats on all sides, and it sort of seems like there's not a lot of places to hide, but there is, like you said, a lot of room to use any weapon, any subclass in Gambit. There's so much room. Were the maps just sort of naturally larger because it's a PvE activity, or how did the shape and structure of the actual player spaces come into form?
So yeah, you actually are hitting on something that you're noticing that is design intention, which is the maps need to be a little more open so that you can perceive what the encounters you're going to fight are, right? You need to be able to perceive all those Cabal Scions and surrounding a Colossus that is 20 or 30 meters away. Gambit, we definitely have built some prototype maps that are much tighter corridors, and people had a lot harder time actually clearing the waves and understanding where they were within the spaces.
Yeah, people get lost. Like, we had a prototype map that we actually fundamentally switched on recently. That's going to come out in Season of the Drifter. Spoilers, but it was, Robbie and I were talking about it earlier today. It was really close quarters, and what we found was people would just get lost, and the encounters, the types of encounters, the encounter density was just so different and a lot less satisfying in many ways. And so that led us to make some changes. But it was, Robbie's totally right. It's sort of fighting the AI. It's a lot more fun when you can see what you're getting into versus like walking around the corner and, like that old scene in the first Star Wars where Han Solo walks around the corner and there's, 30 stormtroopers. It's like, it's a funny scene. It's not so fun to do that over and over again, right? Yeah. If you're playing a match of Gambit.
Yeah, and it's all about perception, right? Like, one thing, a lot of the artists who work on the Gambit maps have also worked on PvP maps. So that's also one thing. So they do have the pedigree of double checking the sightlines, and our designers and artists work hand in hand, but our artists are our level designers. And so it's really on them to really fine tune those sightlines. And they spend a lot of time. We try to get the rough feel of a map, those rough fronts, like the beach, the trees, the ruins, try to get really strong theming of them and get them blocked out really nicely. And then the artists spend a lot of time fine tuning those sight lines so that there are some longer sight lines and we know they're going to be there, but we try to make sure that that's not available for every single front. Now, some maps are a little more open than others, and that's something that actually, like Lars was saying in Season of the Drifter, it's something that we've been poking at a little bit. Is like, we know a lot of the maps had pretty long sight lines, so it's something that we have been thinking about as we've been creating new content for the very near future. So,
I mean, I'm wondering about the other side of it. I mean, it seems sort of with the way the game mode is laid out, where you have 3 distinct fronts right now, and you're always kind of moving back and forth between them. You're going back to drop off motes. That there's like an upper limit on size where you're just going to spend a lot of time traveling. But I'm wondering, I mean, did you play with any large maps? And Swain in particular, I wish Swain could be here. Swain really wanted to know when does he get a large map with vehicles enabled, because he really wants to drive something big over a bunch of small things.
So the interesting thing about it, just to be like fully transparent, right? Like Gambit is definitely kind of pushing the threshold on like how much we can do in an activity with 8 players, all the AI, all the PvP combat that's going on. Vehicles aren't off the table for us entirely. That's not something, it's something that Lars and I and the team have talked about a lot actually of wanting to pursue. It just adds a lot of complexity that it could be pretty difficult to overcome. And so we just have to make a constant evaluation on our timelines of like, do we want to do things and iterate on things that we know are working or aren't working? Or do we want to kind of go down a completely unbeaten path? And so that's kind of the call we're trying to make. And in general, that you kind of were saying it like, maps that you have to spend a lot of distance and runtime on just didn't feel very good in Gambit. And actually, you even notice in some of the maps that are medium to large size, I would say like, I was going to use the internal name, I shouldn't. Cathedral of Scars and like Ledge are good examples of maps that we knew that they were a little big, so we went in and put teleporters in both of them, and we iterated on those maps to have more teleportation to kind of close the distance between those active fronts and give invaders more opportunities to back channel players, or players do it to invaders.
Because it works both ways with the teleporters, right? Like not only when the maps got to a certain extent, like to a certain distance, players were definitely internally, they were complaining about how long it would take them to get back to the bank or to move from, opposite fronts. So if you went from, say, let's see, like islands.
Well, it'd be like Gardens to Caves. Yeah, Gardens to Caves on Cathedral Scars. Yeah.
They were really frustrated because it took them a long time, and there's so much time pressure because you're looking at that scoreboard and you're seeing the other team banking motes, and you look at your score and then you go, oh my God, I would like that 10 seconds it took me to sprint from one side to the other. It's like, that was too long, right? Yeah. Like players we try to balance that between like what is good tension and what is bad tension. And the size of the map ended up feeling like bad tension for the players. And so we tried to like either give them shortcuts or make the maps not feel so large.
Yeah, another thing is like the puzzle fighter concept as a kernel, there's a whole velocity to it, right? Like as you're building up combos and as you're kind of dropping blocks on your other player, that your competitor, there's a velocity to it. You build these things up. And so it's something when we were designing the maps that we noticed that like there's a good velocity and pacing to Gambit, and it's something that was intentional, but we didn't fully understand until we had all our systems stood up and all our core components of the mode. And then once they started singing, and we really tuned them originally to more of Emerald Coast was kind of the original vanilla map that we created. We kind of tuned a lot of the velocity to that, and then as we created some slightly larger maps to have longer range engagements, we found that some of the velocity shifted, and we had to rethink how we tuned some of the experience. And because we didn't want every map to be the same size, right? Like Emerald Coast is the smallest right now. Kel's Grave is kind of the medium size, and then Cathedral Scars and Legion's Follies are the large maps. And so it's something that like, that's again why we have this teleporters, but we really wanted to focus on maintaining that velocity, maintaining players feeling like they're always pushing forward, even if they get knocked down by invaders or blockers. And so we didn't want people spending too much time running across maps to lose that velocity, but also we wanted to give people more opportunities to actually master the maps. That's actually something that was really important to our designers and our world artists making it, right? Like if you use those teleports effectively, if you jump into that drill teleporter on Legion's Folly right as someone invaded, you're going to throw them for a loop. They're going to have to reevaluate, like, oh, that guy had 15 motes and he just disappeared into the hole. Where did he go? I'm going to have to go after him over in steps, right? Like we wanted players to have, after they've spent 20, 30, 40 hours playing the game mode, they can really start to sink into these maps and master them.
So when you're determining where to place the spawn locations for invaders, I mean, it seems like that plays pretty heavily into it, right? I mean, you know, there's a limited number. There's some sort of intelligibility there for an experienced player to go like, all right, the invader's coming. It's got to be one of these three places. And then it also kind of sets the invasions up for a certain kind of tempo where you're generally starting pretty far away and you're sort of making your way in. How did, where we ended up at today, kind of, what was the process like narrowing down onto that?
So really the biggest thing we noticed about invasion teleport locations were that was orientation and distance to the bank were kind of the two biggest things that we try to deal with. So we noticed that if you spend too much time having to try to close the distance on the bank or players, that feels bad. And then also when you're orienting coming out of those teleport points, that unless they're placed in a location where you kind of have roughly a 180 focal point of a lot of the map, people were having a really hard time and getting really confused of where they were coming from.
Knowing where they were. And because you only have a limited amount of time, we had to make sure they felt like, okay, I generally know where I am or where I'm supposed to go within the first few seconds.
Yeah, so that's kind of those were the two main goals when placing those point locations that we were trying to focus on. And so really, it's like, that's why when you invade, you're usually behind a piece of cover that you have to move around. That's why you're usually generally oriented somewhere looking at the bank, because the bank is the center of the map, and then that way, that's the focal point, and you can kind of see the two other fronts around it. Because the system we have in place right now, and we're actually making some iterations to it for Season of the Drifter, basically we know roughly where players are on the map, so we try to spawn the invader away from players to give players an opportunity to actually react to that invasion coming in. So, and we've heard feedback about that, and that's something that we're looking at for Season of the Drifter, of tweaking a little bit as well.
Yeah,
so
we've got some good plans there.
Yes.
So we can talk more in depth at some point once that stuff's locked down. But yeah, it would definitely be interesting to hear too if you guys have I'm sure you have other questions, but at some point if you had like, what were the things that you'd want to see changed if you could, right? Like we're always down to hear that feedback, and we're at a point right now where we can, if we can't do it in Season of the Drifter, we'd try to figure out how to do it in the future at some point.
Well, yeah, we'll get there. Don't worry.
Yay!
Well, so here's a question. This came out, Forsaken. It was this big shift in the sandbox a little earlier on. The kinetic primary special, all of that was happening, which is a huge turn in D2. And so what did you have to consider with all of that, launching a new mode? For example, you mentioned Ikelos, like boss burning and stuff like that. Did those kind of PvE strategies affect how this game mode went before it came out into this world that had already been, changing and already existed?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because, so like I said earlier, or at the very beginning of the conversation, when we talked, we had been working on Gambit for a little while already. Once things like Ikelos were coming along, and people were figuring out Tractor Cannon and Melting Point and the escalation protocol burning strategies and that kind of thing. Like, so we were, as those things were coming together and the community was really figuring that stuff out, those were some of the late shifts that we made to, for example, how the Primeval works. And I think Robbie and I agree, you probably agree as well. I'm sure there's still work we could do there to make that experience better, but we did as much as we could, knowing the community would find even better strategies. They will always find a way.
Yeah.
But we took that stuff into account as we were designing the Primeval fight, for example. But then beyond that, I still remember when we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for Forsaken, aside from us working on Gambit, we had already been playing Gambit, and it was fun. With kinetic energy, and then shotgun, sniper, rocket launcher. I'm sure you guys remember the dark times when all that stuff was just in the power slot, or as I like to still call it, the heavy slot.
The heavy slot, yeah.
But the first time we play tested with, I had a pulse, shotgun secondary, and a rocket launcher. I was sitting next to Steve Cotton. I'm pretty sure Robbie was in the room too. I just looked at Cotton and I'm like, yeah, we got to ship this. Because I was like rolling through the active front with my shotgun. A servitor pops up. I'm like, boom, 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 take down the servitor, grab the 3 or 4 motes, roll over to the side, start popping, like dregs in the face. And I was like, yeah, this is just really good. And it's way better than Pulse AR, rocket launcher, and please let's do this. And that was like I already knew it was going to feel good because of all the D1, like the way that Sandbox felt in D1. And I love that we tried like the dual primary stuff for D2. I thought it was really cool and I was into it. It's just, I think it was hard. It was difficult because you were sort of missing out on shotguns and sniper rifles and stuff. But then once we brought that stuff back in, it didn't fundamentally change some things, but it definitely made us rethink some of the other things like the Primeval fight.
Yeah, and there was a period of time, it's pretty interesting, where we had been tuning the mode for a little while based on kind of the original D2 sandbox, and then everything shifted. And it definitely took a little while to get the meat of the PV encounters to feel good again, right? Like it took us a little while to kind of retune that experience to kind of account for the additional power that the players had in that energy slot.
Because we could burn through stuff a lot faster than we were previously when we were the dual primary.
Yeah, so that was definitely, it was actually really fun and interesting, but it was definitely a scary prospect for a little bit, because we had this thing that we had working for about I think it was like 3 or 4 months that we were feeling really good about, and then everything shifted. And that's always a little scary in game dev, but it's always fun because it's a new opportunity kind of like to kind of move some stuff around, move some pieces around on the chessboard to create new experiences. And ultimately, it just opens up so many different play styles too, which is what Lars was talking about earlier, basically. And that's the part that we're like, okay, this is great. Like, we just have to do this. So it was fun, honestly. It was fun to see happen.
Yeah, it was neat. It just made us, I think it made us make some really cool decisions. And especially...
It let us make things harder too, which was fun.
Let us make things a lot harder, which was, which was really cool.
Yeah.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but I gotta deliver a message from our sponsor this week. Support for today's show comes from HelloFresh. Make conquering the kitchen in 2019 a reality with deliciously simple recipes from HelloFresh. Each week, they deliver a pre-measured ingredients in a box. It's easy to follow, 6-step pictured recipe cards. It's right to your door. It's insulated. It's awesome. All meals come together in 30 minutes max and call for less than 2 pots and pans and require minimal cleanup. Sounds good to me. And with 3 plans to choose from, got the classic, the veggie, and the family, as well as the option to switch plans whenever your tastes change. There's something for everyone. Honestly, I've talked about it before, but these things are a dream come true for me. I hate going shopping. I hate buying a pound of one ingredient and then not being able to use the rest of it after one recipe. It never made sense to me. And this is so easy. It's right there. You just literally open a bag and pour it into the pot because you don't have to measure and get all these spoons messy and have your sink just full of dishes to do. It's wonderful. I've always loved it. So take advantage of HelloFresh's special offer for 2019. You can get $80 off your first month by going to HelloFresh.com/Crucible80 and enter promo code Crucible80. That's HelloFresh.com/Crucible80 and enter promo code CRUCIBLE80 to take advantage of this special offer. It's huge. $80 off your first month. Amazing. Let's get back to the show.
All right. Well, I want to kind of shift gears a little bit here. We've sort of been focused on everything leading up to this moment of release. This game mode comes out and, everyone gets to play it for the first time. I mean, at least from where I could tell, it was a hit, right? Like, it was fun to play, even if it wasn't, the only activity you were going to play going forward, like Swain. It felt like, it just felt very Destiny from the get-go. I'm kind of curious. I mean, you're there on launch day, or I guess, the week before, and people are loading it up for the first time. What were your expectations going into that? And how did the reception feel?
Well, we knew that people were going to die with a lot of moats, right? I mean, let's just get that off the table, right?
We knew that people, and Robbie's hinting at something too. Like, the mode is relatively simple for the most part. We designed it with, hey, as long as you're killing ads, you're effectively doing the right thing. Okay, as long as you're killing ads and then layer on things on top of it. It's like, and then are you collecting the moats? Cool, you're also doing the right thing. Are you then bringing those moats back to the bank and banking them? Great. That's great too. In fact, that's wonderful because you're helping your team win. Now, on top of that, are you actually looking at how many motes you have and then deciding when and how many to send? Awesome, great. Are you noticing the invasion portal? Like, as I'm sure you know now because you've been playing Gambit for months, but like it's sort of a complex mode. Like there's a lot of things going on. And so for the early players, like if they didn't understand it, I think I was nervous. I'm sure Robbie was nervous too about like how players were going to react to like not understanding why maybe they just lost pretty spectacularly because they didn't understand they could put more motes in at a time, or they should have waited at different times to invade, or all the different strategies that sort of come out of Gambit that were intentionally designed into it. So I knew people, the thing was from E3 and then Guardian Con, we knew people had very good reactions to it, but we hadn't had like, the flood of people playing it yet. Yeah. And so it was like sort of nervous anticipation. But then this is actually like a personal highlight for me was I was playing, Luke Smith hadn't played it a whole lot. He had played it maybe a few times internally, and he knew what it was because we'd been talking to him a lot about it. And that first weekend of Forsaken, I was like, when we were going home to start playing, I was like, hey, dude, just let me know what you think. Just whatever, if you want to call, talk, whatever. And it was like Saturday morning at, I don't know, like 10 a.m. He texts me and it was just like, he's like, hey, dude, I just got to say about Gambit. And he just sends what is it, the OK symbol and like 5 smiley faces. And I was like, okay, he likes it. Cool. We're good. This is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that like engaged players like you guys would pick it up, right? Like we knew, and so we knew you catch on quickly, and we wanted to make sure there's enough depth there to keep engaged over a long period of time. We just really didn't know how kind of the general population, how they would take to it. It's just hard to know, right? Like there's no way to know for sure what's going to happen. So there's some trepidation there to that. But they picked it up quickly, and people picked up strategies really quickly and started forming their own strategies really quickly, and that was really exciting to see. I think that was kind of the most fun about this was seeing people theory crafting day one immediately about what the best thing to do was. And I mean, we know it was going to happen, but seeing it unfold is always really different. And then also starting to see them start to try to pick apart all the mechanics and all the kind of the nuances of the mode. And for a while, we want to let people experience that themselves. We want them to discover that themselves. And after a while, there was things like the Primeval that there was enough confusion on that we felt like, okay, now's the opportunity. It's been, I think it was 2 months at that point? Yeah. I think it was 2 or 3 months at that point. And so we made a post kind of trying to clarify a handful of these mechanics because there was still enough confusion around it. And we'd given the player base an opportunity to discover it, right? That's the thing is we don't want to rip it out from you guys. We want to give you guys the opportunity to experience it firsthand and to understand it before we kind of come in and just go, this is exactly how it works. So...
Well, that then leads me to be curious about how the evolution of the meta has been received. I mean, we got to get to the spicy stuff here eventually, but like, for example, linear fusion rifles suddenly have their main place in the game of Destiny when they're otherwise a kind of little used weapon. Like how has that, is that been surprising at all?
I think in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. Like I would love to hear from you guys, like, what's your take on that? I mean, you said it. It's like linear fusion rifles, you don't use them a whole lot in the rest of the game. However, in Gambit or invasions or counter invading, right? Like it has become the thing. And I wonder, like, from your guys' perspective, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's so funny because we've talked about the map size, and it's really fascinating to get that perspective that, yes, if it's too small or too compressed, it's chaos. You can't see. You need that time to react. But, me personally, I get so hype when I get some play. And, sometimes I invade and I don't have power ammo, and that's on me. But when I can make a play out of that, when I can get some shotgun kills or just use my hand cannon, it's the best feeling. And I have clips saved on my computer of just using, Claymore, like just a Claymore 4-piece is like the coolest thing. So yeah, I mean, it's really tough, and I don't envy you guys because I'm sitting there going like, make a small map, let me get 4 melee kills. But then it's like, but that would probably be a mess on the PvE side.
I mean, I think one thing I'm not a sniper, right? Like I'm typically not a long range player. I spend a lot of time in the Crucible. I like to get up close and mix it up. And so I think, the first time I kind of experienced that invasion, well, the first time is great because nobody knows what they're doing and you can just kind of wander in there and shoot people in the back. That's fun. But I think it seemed like just sort of some of the dictates of the game mode, right? Like you're 1v4, you start off usually quite a distance away. You really want to, you got to maximize as much value out of each invasion as possible. That, charging in as a Titan with a shotgun is risky. A player that's gonna, that can snipe, that can use a sniper rifle, that can really use those wall hacks is gonna, just reliably perform a lot better. And then it seemed like there was just something with the sandbox, right? Something with the overshield, something with the, the way the damage numbers work out, that those linear fusions just put you in a good spot. Like they happen to work out really well for taking out other players. I think probably players are going to end up using whatever works the best or whatever they've figured out that works the best. And it just seems like that seems to be it for Gambit for that invasion side.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way right now. I mean, we were able to do some changes to Sleeper Simulant, for example, because that was the thing. And now I'd be surprised if you see anyone using Sleeper Simulant. So I think there are lessons for us there to learn too. Like we want to keep Gambit fresh and interesting. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do if we want to do that is probably look at linear fusion rifles and see like what we can do there too. And these are conversations we have internally all the time. And what are the best ways to address it? Because the invader, by definition, like you said, like we want them to be a good distance away, so you're not spawning right next to a group of individuals, and that 4v1 feels like you just get overwhelmed. But we also want to make sure, like, hopefully there's a bunch of different play styles that can, that like every time you get invaded, you're not sure quite what's going to happen. And I think we're not there right now. So I think it's on us to make that better, whatever that ends up being.
So I wonder about that evolution going forward, right? Like it seems at this point in the current game mode, the player base is really segmented pretty hard. As a solo player, or, you go into a game mode as a solo player and you're playing with a lot of other solo players, many of whom are just getting their engram, doing their bounties, that, you want it to be viable, right? And I understand you want to put things into the game mode that sort of teach you or sort of incentivize starting to do some of those like layers of thinking about the game mode that get you closer to winning. On the flip side, you have teams where for them, Gambit feels like a solved problem. They've got their loadouts, they've got their roles, they've got their callouts. They know every spawn location. They know all the timings. They know exactly how many motes, who's going to do at each stage. And they've got melting the Primeval just down to a science. So I'm kind of wondering, like, now that you've had this big sort of striation in the player base, where do you go from here? How do you develop Gambit and still try and give those crazy good teams a challenge while not leaving, the solo newbie players in the dust?
So I think that I can't obviously speak to everything that's in development or anything really because we haven't talked about it that much. But I will say, the thing I can say is a lot of the stuff you're highlighting is stuff that the team has taken to heart, right? Based on the feedback we've seen, based on us playing the mode, right, live. And you will see an evolution of Gambit that touches at a lot of the stuff you're saying. You're seeing. I mean, it's not going to be a fundamental shift, right? It's not going to be a completely different experience. It's still going to be the Drifter. It's still going to be fighting enemies, right? It's still going to be fighting Primevals, but there's going to be a pretty fundamental experiential shift within that Gambit paradigm, though, for Season of the Drifter. And I mean, we really can't talk much more about it than that.
But it'll be cool to see how people react to those changes, and then how they feel like. How it differs from traditional Gambit, and and at the same time, I think we'd like to mix up traditional Gambit if we're able to, and we don't know that time frame yet, but that would be something that we talk about too pretty frequently.
Like adding interceptors and sparrows. Is what you mean,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Hypothetically. Well, you guys might not be able to talk about it, but we're still allowed to ask about it.
That's true.
I'm wondering, is there like a competitive future for Gambit? Are we going to get a ranked mode? Do you guys, I mean, and we understand this is a vision, that can span over multiple years, but do you ultimately see like could we have a directory of different Gambit modes that all kind of sit in that same basic shape, but feel distinctly different?
I mean, anything's on the table technically. I mean, Destiny is going to be a game that exists for a long time. Yeah. So I think the best way to answer this question right now, at least for the current state of things, is like Trials was a really cool experience for a very small percentage of our player base. And that was our initial focus. But what we found over time was when we focus more on the fun and the fun within the competition, right? Like fun coming first and competition coming second. That's when a lot more people started to enjoy the mode more. And we are definitely, I think, sticking to that for now. If that's kind of the...
I think that, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's, some people can hear that as like, it's not something I should take seriously, but it makes perfect sense when you look at the weapon changes, like it was serious in a way, but then shotguns in your special slot. Now it's more fun. There's just a little bit more crazy. So I do understand how that fits into, where Destiny is right now as a whole. And I think it makes sense.
All right. Well, I'm going to try once more. And go ahead and leave out anything that might be on the table for the next year, but like total blank check. If Gambit could be something 5 years from now, if you had a vision for what this thing looks like in its final form, I mean, where could this end up? Like, just on a personal level, where would you like to see this game mode go?
Go for Lars. Yeah. I want to hear. I want to hear Lars. Yeah,
this is interesting. Obviously stating up front that this is not even a plan in place, but I think the thing you guys talked about Gambit being like a sort of series of modes that could be different depending on the type of thing you're interested in as a player, definitely has some really cool. That like is a really cool stage. So like in terms of making it closer to the Crucible, so like you could go into a place and then pick from a few different moods. That could be really neat. But I like if you're talking 5 years, like that feels so much further out. I think about stuff like what if Gambit was totally in the open world and you were I don't know, the craziest version of they're like, you're joining a faction or something like that, and you're going into the open world and you're hunting down artifacts, or you're hunting down like different things that are really valuable to you, and you're taking some of those lessons from Gambit with like being invaded or being like the other team sort of like messing with you in a way. I don't know, like I think about that. Because at that point, then Swain would be happy because we'd probably have vehicles in there too. Because it'd be like, a big, massive open world where you're going after these kinds of things and people are coming and going in real time. And because right now in Crucible and Gambit, you've got these sort of, and by design, you've got these matches that last 10, 15 minutes, whatever, and then you're sort of in and you're out and you have your experience, and that's really cool. I also I would love it for us to experiment with sort of more long form stuff at some point too, or like, hey, I don't know. I could ramble on this forever and probably and talk about it till my face was blue. But yeah, essentially trying to push it closer into the like main core loop of Destiny could be pretty interesting. I'm not sure how we'd do it, but I think that could be cool.
I think Luke Smith described it really well when he said like Gambit has kind of charted out and created this little PvE/VP island to exist on. And we have a lot of opportunities in the future of Destiny to see how we can either expand on that island or chart from that island to new adventures, which I know is like silly like metaphor talk, but I think it works really well, right? Like if you just like think about Destiny as all these like these little continents and these little islands that you can have all these different experiences on. Gambit is this really nice island right now, and Gambit's going to grow bigger soon. But there's probably other PvE/VP islands that have been inspired by Gambit at this point, especially seeing the players' reaction to it. That I think we as a studio are going to think about, like Lars is saying. Like again, we can't talk about anything. There's no real plans for any, right? Like
what I said is not even real. It's just like
it
could be totally cool to have something like that.
I mean, Lars and I we've even discussed within the core of what Gambit is, right? Like, would it be fun for there to be just like a moat rush mode with no Primeval? And part of the reason for that is like, Primeval wasn't originally in Gambit. That wasn't in the original concept, and that's something that we added later over playtesting. We actually had a playtest where basically, if it went to sudden death, we spawned a boss, and the first team to kill the boss would win. And it happened in a playtest, and that was so much fun that we were like, this should just be part of the mode all the time, right? Like that's one of those happenstances that happens in game development that is super exciting. But that moat rush kind of experience that we had before was still.
Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah, it was really fun and really compelling. And so there's all these little opportunities that I think we're gonna look at kind of what players are enjoying and what they're craving for, and seeing how we can change and iterate on Gambit or just PvE/VP experiences in the future. And to be honest, like we're gonna keep looking at other games, right? The best game design looks at all the things around them and see what's amazing. Like we can't wait to see Division 2's New Dark Zone, right? Yeah. Like we want to see what that's all about, right? We want to see what's going on with any other looter shooter, right? Like we're going to take inspiration from wherever we can. So sorry, I know we're kind of dancing around the question, but I think it's just we're being really honest.
And honestly, right? we don't know what we're gonna do. I mean, we know what we're doing for Season of the Drifter,
yes,
which is not too far away. And Robbie said this too, and it made me realize something. Like, I'm pretty interested to see what people do with Gambit private matches as well, because we're giving them like not a ton of options, but a couple of pretty interesting options, and seeing what they're gonna do, and knowing that you could load that up with your friends or even solo, right? And just play it and have fun is kind of cool. So
5 years is a long time.
Yeah, I know. That's
5 years is a really long time.
Fair.
Okay, hear me out. 12 players each side, scorpion tanks, wraiths, ghosts, snipers and rocket launchers, big team battle. I think it's a perfect fit for this game. Just saying.
I mean, we've had similar conversations. It's not that we've never talked about it. Yeah. It's definitely something that we have. Like I said, anything's possible. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I joke, but if I could hope for one thing, as a big PvP player, I've always been saying that, like, oh, give me big team battle. I loved combined arms and stuff like that. Sure. But it's almost like Gambit has more potential for that. I love the scale of it. And I love that it's like this crazy boss melt. It's, can you kill 15 enemies in 3 seconds flat? Are you good at that? Or can you hit 4 headshots against enemy guardians? And it feels like it has a potential to get big, to have a big scale fight. And that's why it like gives me tingles talking about like just Gambit taking over the entire world of Destiny in big open spaces. Like it's just the vision. And I love that. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, Raid Boss Gambit sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of Robbie said moat rush. Like the other thing is like, what if there's a primeval rush too? It's and now your team is like, when do you use your heavy? When do you use your supers? When do you? It's all about like going through a series of events or a series of like mini boss fights now, and you're doing that in the same vein as the other team. And so you both have these challenges in front of you, and at the same time, maybe you're sending over bosses, right? It's like maybe the first team to beat the primeval sends the second primeval over to the other side. Whatever, we're getting crazy.
We're always looking for ways to excite and delight, right? It's like it's funny. It sounds funny, but it's like Dan Miller, who's been at Bungie a long time. Like he's done all these crazy prototypes, and he's really inspiring. And actually, some of the prototypes that he had made a little over a year, like it's got to be over a year ago now, inspired us to do some of the stuff that we did in Gambit. And so, like I worked on Destiny 1 strike stuff and strike scoring in the Dawning, and a lot of that work inspired me, and seeing how players reacted to kind of kind of how they were comboing and how they were building up the scores and creating the economy for Gambit. And so we're going to kind of keep, like I said, we're going to kind of keep looking outside of our game to get inspiration, but then we're also going to look at what other designers are doing in our game and other people that are doing in order to highlight what's best about Destiny and keep building on that too whenever we can. So...
Well, oh man, yeah, we could just keep trying to get info out of you, but I know we have, we're taking up your time. So I wanted to ask if you could, give us a hype, and it could be as cryptic as Deej writing the TWAB, but Season of the Drifter, what should we expect? What surprises might come out of the shadows? If you could give us some hype for it.
So I think the thing that, I don't think this gives anything away, but I think people are probably wondering like how and if we go into the backstory of the Drifter at all, and we totally do in some really cool ways.
Yeah, we're definitely,
which I think people are going to be very excited. Like I'm excited when I see this lore stuff and some of the other things we're doing. I'm like, oh my God, people are going to love this. Like, there's one thing in particular. Well, there's a bunch of things, but like there's one thing in particular. Actually, two things in particular that I don't want to give specifics on. That when people see or experience, they're like, "Oh my God, that is awesome!" So, yeah. I know. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to.
Word.
Yeah, I'm not trying to tease too much, but it's cool. Like we've got some really neat experiences lined up, and we've, the roadmap sort of says the major beats, and we've got. Those major beats, like a new Gambit experience, Gambit private matches, some new maps, but then there's some things we obviously don't want to talk about and wouldn't talk about until we're ready to. But it's going to be good, and it's more. I know that people in the community, or like even within the last few days or weeks, have said like, I hope it's not just all about Gambit, and it is. I think the takeaway that people should have if they're listening to that is that there is some Gambit stuff, but this is about the Drifter too. There's a reason it's called Season of the Drifter, and so there are Gambit experiences, but there are other experiences too that have nothing to do with Gambit and that are new as well. And I think people are going to really, really like them.
Yeah, the one tidbit that I like to just throw on, and this is just more because I'm hyped about it, like. The narrative group that has been working with us, we've been working together since Forsaken, right? Like conceptually, it's been the same people, roughly the same members of the Gambit team and the narrative team working together on the Drifter. And so a lot of the stuff we built for original Gambit that you see when you play the game mode all the time, it's going to evolve and it's going to change. Yeah. And so, and it's been amazing to watch our narrative crew, our writers, our artists, our cinematics people, all of them kind of take these concepts that we did a really good thrust initially in Forsaken and just expand on it even more.
And people internally, like I'm going to speak for a lot of people, they love the Drifter internally. I know a lot of people outside of Bungie love the Drifter too, and so they're going to be excited to see his story sort of take more shape and evolve. And like people have had a lot of fun. Like they've had a lot of fun with the work that we're doing on the Drifter and the different experiences we are going to have in Season of the Drifter. He's just a cool character.
Yeah.
I wouldn't trust him.
All right.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust him either, but
I'd have some drinks with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, seems fun. Yeah. Well, I said it before, but I'll say it again. I mean, when this game mode showed up, it just felt so completely and so thoroughly Destiny, just like, where you been all my life. So to know that in this next season, it goes from being a game mode to something with real weight in the story, real relevance within the world. It's not just, a vendor you get some bounties from and then you go knock out your games. I'm really excited, and I can't wait to see. So yeah, I want to pay you guys a compliment. I mean, it's really a fantastic experience. I'm amazed at the mileage we've gotten out of just this one game mode so far. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about it. It's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you guys. This is really fun. Like, I listen to the podcast a lot, and it's cool. I feel like I've talked to you guys before, even though I probably haven't. But so thank you again for reaching out and letting us be on.
Yeah, we're always happy to talk about Drifty Boy. So
Drifty Boy.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, long overdue. Thanks so much, guys.
Feels like like it's all too much. She'll say, boy, boy,
Well, that's it, folks. Thank you for listening, and thank you again to Robbie and Lars for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure to have Bungie stop by and give us an insight and give us a look behind the curtains of how our favorite game is made. We really appreciate them making time to do that, and and the guys upstairs at Bungie for allowing them to come on the show and talk to us. It's really nice to be able to connect, especially with with how much we play this game, how much we love it. And, everyone wants to hear from them, and it's really great. And I know they feel the same way. It's great for us to talk in this long format versus a Twitter post or a blog post. So it was very cool. And I'm excited to play some Gambit in the future, man. I'm going to be honest, this got me hyped for Season of the Drifter. If not just for the cool lore and the stuff we're going to learn about the character of the Drifter and everything else. So very excited. Again, thank you to Sean Currlin for the music. And if you like us, listen to Real World Crucible Radio. It's a bonus podcast. It's on Patreon, and it's $1 an episode. And we talk about, there's one rule. We can talk about whatever we want except Destiny. And we've got a lot to say about so many things. And we have some of our friends stop by. It's a good time. So check it out at patreon.com/Crucible Radio, or just head to our website, crucibleradio.com, and find all our good stuff there. Thanks for listening. We love you. Bye.
we all have steps to take. Your joy is what you make.
Hello everyone, Swain here. You know that Crucible Radio is your source for all things Destiny PvP, and I know you want more than just this video, so make sure to head on over to crucibleradio.com to find all of our past episodes, detailed Crucible maps, t-shirts, and much more.